Hello. Okay.
Very good morning to the learners. Today we have with us one of our alumnus, Dr. Sarvesh Pandey, who is quite experienced in the field of sustainability study. His last assignment is in service was this oil natural gas corporation, India, and he is closely now after joining IGNOU as a postgraduate diploma in sustainability science, and he is also closely working with IGNOU as an expert to develop Master of Arts in Sustainability Science. Also, I welcome you, sir, in the session. With this brief introduction, sir, I invite you to start the session. Thank you very much, sir.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Kuman. And this presentation will be covering the definition of environment and its ambit, environmentalism, and what were the background triggers, in fact, in the environmental movement, and who are the people participated in the environmental movements, and what is the type of movement particularly, and the constituents of the movements. This will be the ambit of today's presentation with you, sir. So, as you know, that everything that affects an organism during its lifetime is collectively known as environment. Environment is just external surrounding, providing nutrient and energy and other living conditions to the organisms in a direct or indirect manner. And it is composed of living and non-living components. This is the basic environmental science, and the components, in fact, include the abiotic and biotic. Biotic are normally microbes, plants, and animals, including human beings. And the abiotics are these are the physical factors. They are complementing the biotic factors of the environment. This is again the natural. There are three kinds of environments. One is the natural environment, other is man-modified environment, and the third one is the man-made environment. That includes industries, cities, towns, crop fields, artificial lakes, and dams. Environment is all pervasive. In fact, it is really embracing the atmosphere, hydrosphere, and lithosphere. Why environmental concern has arisen, in fact, because this is due to the fact that our very existence is dependent on the conservation of the environment. We derive everything that is the matter and energy from the environment. But during the
slides not moving, sir.
Sir, slides are not moving, but from my side it is moving, sir.
That is what I told you, sir. Please stop this share screen and reshare it.
Okay, just
Plus, first you just keep that slide mode, that windows open. Then you just come into these Zoom windows and start screen sharing. When you start a screen sharing, share that particular windows where your that PPT is running. That PPT running, that is that window. You must have seen number of windows. Of that, you have to choose that one which you run full screen mode.
Just a second. बेटा गुड़िया गुड़िया एक मिनट बेटा क्या कह रहे हैं सर मैं तो समझ नहीं पा रहा हूँ Okay, sir, just briefly tell my daughter, in fact, sir, I'm not so specialist in computer.
This
Hello.
is better. It's clear now.
Yeah, yes. Why environmental concern? Because our very existence is dependent on the conservation of the environment. We are deriving energy and matter out of this. But the pace of the economic development during the 19th and 20th century have pushed the environmental and ecological awareness into the background. This is the reason of the environmental concern, sir. Impacts due to industrial revolution that has been felt due to the unprecedented growth, and that has resulted into the exploitation of natural resources, enlargement of agriculture, introduction of the high yield varieties, synthetic fertilizer and pesticides used in a very, very indiscriminate quantity, intensive and unregulated utilization of the land surface. In fact, grazing is another factor. and that has really adversely impacted the entire landscape. Mining industries are really defacing the landscape. Desertification, hydrological deterioration, air pollution, greenhouse gas emissions are associated effects. Environmental awareness is really a concept, in fact. This is meant for saving the environment. And environmental concern, when it is translated or reaches the ground level, that becomes a collective one, in fact. And prior to various moments, uh, it is worth to briefly mention the triggers that really triggered the realization towards the environmental conditions. Now, those triggers, I would like to cite first of all the silent spring. That is, the story sparked the global grassroots environmental movement in 1962 that has been really written by the Rachel Carsons. And in fact, it really pointed out these effects of the pesticides, large-scale use of the pesticides. Posthumously, she was also awarded Presidential Medal of Freedom by the Jimmy Carter, by President of the United States. Now, the silent spec, in fact, that has really pointed out the fact that the pesticides do not only affect the particular pest. In general, the whole ecosystem is affected, and DDT can harm even without the direct exposure. We need to have environmental concern, in fact, to prevent the harmful effects of the pesticides. Now, pesticide distribution is through the runoff or pesticide drifts that can reach to the distant environments, grazing areas, human settlements, undeveloped areas, and over a period of time, pests really uh, build the pest resistance, in fact. And the effects include very serious concerns. They pose very serious concerns. That is, the endocrine disruptions, cell thinning. They are carcinogenic. Vertebrate immune system is badly impacted. Bird poisoning occurs, impaired metabolism, behavioral change in arthropods. So these are some of the indicative bad effects done by the pesticides. Now, the another trigger point is the limits to growth, in fact, that really gave insights into resource depletion, population increase, and the accumulation of the waste, in fact, beyond the absorptive capacity of the environment. These are the three factors that was highlighted by the limits to growth report, in fact. Now, limits to growth, in fact, that came in 1972, and its findings were really presented in the Moscow and the Rio de Janeiro in the summer of 1971. And the report has really concluded that without a substantial change in consumption pattern, the depletion in natural resources cannot be really stopped. And the third is very, very important
And
report,
slide
that
is
is
not
our
moving.
common future. And that report was really submitted in the 1987. And during those periods, it was seen that the drought triggered the environment development crisis in Africa. 36 million people were at risk, killing perhaps a million. And the other incident that has happened, in fact, that is the pesticide factory in Bhopal. You might be knowing that the methyl isocyanate was really leaked out. That blinded so many people, more than 2 lakh people, and killed around 2,000 people. And the liquid gas tank exploded in Mexico City. These all the incidents happened during the preparation of that report, and it was very, very devastating events, in fact, during that time. Chernobyl nuclear reactor explosion, that has sent very serious fallouts across the Europe, and the agricultural chemical solvents and mercuries that flowed into the Rhine River during that time. An estimated 60 million people died of
Slide is
that.
not moving. Sir, slides are not moving.
Again, now,
Who is administrator? Are dialed to? Yeah, slides are not moving, sir. Not at all.
not at
Uh,
all.
not at all.
Gudiya,
Otherwise, we can cancel this session
Vikas
also.
slides are not moving.
Administrator, who is this administrator?
Administrator is my daughter, sir. She is helping me, sir. that was the re-examination. The mandate of Common Future was really, in fact, the re-examination of the critical issues of the environment and development and formulate the innovative, concrete and the realistic action proposals to deal with them, in fact. And it was also meant for strengthening the international cooperation and the raising the understanding of the commitment to action. And in fact, the total focus area was on the population, food security, loss of species, genetic resources, energy, industry, and human settlements. Now, it is just focusing on the interdependence of the nations in search of sustainable path. And Stockholm Conference, which has introduced environmental concern to the form of political development sphere, it has recapped this spirit has been captured by the report of our common future, and this also laid the foundation for convening the Earth Summit and the Agenda 21, and that is the Rio Declaration and establishment of Commission on the Sustainable Development. Now let us take about the what are the kinds of the people in fact who engage in the movement. That is the ecosystem people who are really dependent on the entire ecosystem and their very basis of sustenance is dependent on that. And other is the biosphere people whose area is quite large and global in the context, and they can the resource base brought to them is either through tribute tax or through the market exchange. Such people really engage in the environmental movement when they realize global threat to environment is happening. Now, this is the type of movement. One is the conservationist, in fact, other is preservationists. And conservationists are normally, in fact, the Western and advanced countries, which are rich nations, in fact. And the preservationists definitely they look towards the nature as the integral whole, and they give due diligence and respect to the nature, in fact. Now, Western view is always consumptionist, and that they feel the dualism between nature and culture. And but the scientific fact is that you can no longer really ignore the environment containing the biological diversity, preservation of natural resources are needed, in fact, for the global survival. And wanton depletion and destruction will not really work. In fact, that has to be stopped. So, so what happened? In fact, there are two kinds of the social movements. In fact, one is just caring for uh, the social disparities, and now the recent one has really cut across the divisions. In fact, class divisions, and they are moving towards the larger landscape. In fact, larger perspectives, and in this, NGOs have really played very important role, and their emergence is really uh, a boon to the movements of the environment. Now, this has been a WB, World Bank has really defined NGOs in they have very critical role, in fact, to play in so many things. So they are very diverse in nature, and the term NGO is catchword, and that is really that is representing the enormous varieties of structures. And NGO is often traced to the many associations and movements appearing in the United States and Western Europe, particularly after the World War II. And the result of initiatives of this is the really the assemblage of the various middle class individuals in response to devastating effects of the war. And some important NGOs are Committee of the Red Cross, CARE, World Vision, and Oxfam. These organizations are referred as non-governmental organizations because of their status in the United States. Now, the Stockholm Conference of 1972 and Agenda 21 of 1992 has really envisaged the legal liability regimes, economic regulation, and the various significant roles played by the NGOs in their making. Uh, the first NGOs, in fact, assembled at Flamingo Park to discuss the various environmental issues. This is the genesis of the environment. Slowly, NGOs movement coming into the picture. In fact, they are very diverse from OSOC Spiritual to ROI, Greenpeace, and the International Campaign for Tibet, and the Royal Institute of the International Affairs. Now they have got two NGOs 1962 onwards. In fact, they have got several perspectives, particularly one the development perspective, and this has arisen as a result of the failure of the state-led development model. In fact, that's what we call as a development perspective. And the other perspective is advocacy perspectives, where these NGOs really they become the voice of the people, in fact, and they really represent the marginalized and those who have been excluded from the developmental process. Now there are some movements, in fact, the Green Belt movement of Kenya that are under the Professor Wangari Maathai, that is in 1977, and she really struggled for environmental causes and human rights. And she continued, in fact, her crusade for the continued improvement in green and clean environment, promotion of the consciousness of self-determination, equity, and improved livelihoods and the environmental conservation, using tree plantation as an entry point. And her focus was also towards enabling the leadership among the women who can take the cudgels and to move ahead, that they can improve their lives. In fact, she also attempted for transfer of technology from experts to people, raise the awareness of the people to the environment, and nearly 600 community networks that care for 6,000 trees, nurseries, in fact, and she has helped in planting more than 30 million trees on the private and public land, protected reserves, and the urban centers. Plantation has really helped in transforming many landscapes. The other civil movement, in fact, began against the Indian Power Project in Nepal. In fact, that was worth $6 to $9 billion to develop the project for exporting the cheap power to India and China. The fact is, Iran didn't have that much capability. There was no track record for uh, such a project, in fact. That was the reason that the people really stood in the opposition of that particular project, and it was causing the disruption in the natural flow of water for the cheap electricity generation, and it was affecting a large uh, mass loss of the biodiversity, and the entire river ecosystems was being disrupted, and fish varieties they were the integral part of the ecosystem. They were badly affected. Dams really alter the flow of the water, and sediments change the entire makeup of the rivers, and natural migration of the fish was expected to be disturbing the fish movement, and the dissenting society really raised the voice, in fact, and they really opposed the Enron project, and that happened in due time. It happened. It saw the collapse in time. In fact, another project is Sri Lankan project that was regarding the harnessing of the phosphate deposits, and it was a primarily contract was given to IMC Agrico, a merger of IMC Global Inc. and Freeport McMahon Resources. And the protest was spearheaded by the Committee for the Protection of the Ipewala phosphate mines, and various organizations, trade unions, scientists, clergies, and Sri Lanka's main religious groups really joined the movement. What has really happened, that was supposed to cover the 56 square kilometer, and it was it was going to impact the 12,000 people from 26 villages. In fact, many temples, schools, and large number of government buildings were to also face destruction. And what government really contended that the financial worth has not been really realized from the phosphate deposits. That's why Sri Lankan government decided to award this contract to the American firm, and it was really contended that it will raise the uh, phosphate production to the tune of 1.2 million metric tons, in fact, as compared to 40,000. but the people were badly opposed. They badly opposed this one because entire region was to undergo the tremendous change. In fact, the small canals, they were to be affected, water sets were to be affected, and many paddy fields were being they were supposed to be affected, and the natural watershed and the self-sustaining conservation ecosystem was at the peril. In fact, that's why, seeing all these bad impacts, the people wrote, they stood against this particular project. And this area particularly is rich, and the people were deriving all the culinary needs, fuel, gas crops, curry leaves, mushrooms, tank fish, and the building materials. So they are the really sustenance materials for their life, in fact. Later on, what happened that it was having the very serious, severe consequence on the entire region. In fact, that's why alternate plan was developed by the New Zealand, and they suggested that even Sri Lankan government can go ahead with this, with this alternative proposal, and they can avoid very harmful effects that is envisaged in the contract of the American firm. In fact, owing to this large scale protest, government withdrew the proposal. Another case is regarding the Sahabat Alam Malaysia. In fact, that is the Sarawak region where the foreign firms were really doing the commercial logging, and it was duly supported by the government of Malaysia. But the fact that its a bad impact was falling on the indigenous people, that is the Penan, who inhabited the forest, and they moved in the opposition. They protested, in fact, and they built barricades against the loggers for preventing their entry. And this particular uprising really attracted the attention of the NGOs worldwide. Initial movements were supported by Malaysian NGO Sahabat Alam, later on joined by Friends of Earth Malaysia. And this face off continued for a pretty long time. And ultimately, the European Parliament passed a resolution suspending the import of timber from the Sarawak region. And Malaysian government also really started projecting the image of sustainable forest management in defense. And the NGOs formed the Forest Stewardship Councils, in fact. The tribal movement, in fact, focused on the sustenance closely tied with the identity of the people. And the takeover of the forest in 19th century marked the beginning of the end of the forest dwellers, and a struggle began. The state took control over the access was restricted. And the futurist victory, that is termed as the uprising, and involved large tribal groups. So first of all, Rampa rebellion occurred in 1879 in the Visakhapatnam district under the Madras presidency. In fact, they defied the prohibitions, and they really put the police station on fire. And later on, the Maria and Muria Gunts of Basta rose in rebellion. In fact, so did the Gunts and columns of Padilabad district. But British Army drove them out of their paths on this one. Now, this movement particularly gathered the momentum, and the Indian National Congress led the movement during the 1920 and 22, and the women took the lead in the movements in the Akola districts of Maharashtra, where they joined in large numbers and marched with their cattle in the forest. In fact, because of such movements, forest legislations and policies were reworked. Now, Chipko moment is this moment is very well recorded, in fact, and genesis of the problems that Britishers really sensed the commercial potential of these Himalayan forests, and they impose restrictions on the people for using the forest resource, and they lease the Garhwal forest on very paltry sum, in fact. And the Chipko movement is very well known that it started. Before that, it started in Dhandak form, that is a kind of the protest, where peaceful kind of representation. Later on, it became very bloody, and they were treated with the bullets. In fact, what happened during the period of 1970s? Devastating floods, in fact, that occurred in that region, and people started perceiving that this is due to because of the deforestations, landslides and floods, in fact. Now Sarala Devi and Chandi Prasad, they came forward and they mobilized the people to oppose, and the Sauligram Swaraj sang that is ought to hug the tree to prevent the moment, to prevent them from being cut. In fact, that's why it is known as the uh, Chipko moment, because people used to hug those plants, those trees. In fact, so many tricks were played by the government, but nothing worked, and people moved in mass. In fact, they opposed the cutting of the commercial logging of those trees. In fact, and Sundarlal Bahuguna later on joined this movement, and people really people movement really sustained itself and consciousness raised by the leaders, and this led to the passage of UP Trade Protection Act in 1976. Apico movement is on the similar lines of the Chipko movement that happened in the Uttar Kannada, Karnataka, in fact, and that was again people were just these foreign firms were awarded for the commercial logging of the trees, and the people inhabiting the forest area were really devoid of so many resources on which their sustenance was really based. So what happened during this one, that the access rights of the local population of forest has eroded, and removal of the timbers by the private parties continued. And the valuable timbers such as teak, rosewood, and sandalwood, replacement of natural forests with the monoculture plantation was really undertaken, particularly the eucalyptus, and the clearance of the forest for industrial development. These are the issues, they were the crux of issues, in fact, that was really opposed by the Apico Chaluvali, launched by the youth of Salkani village on the lines of Chipko. And ultimately, this agitation really bore the fruit, and that was stopped in that area. Now, there are some of the references, since there was very much really disruption because of the connectivity issue and all that. I was not able to this. I'm very sorry for that, but I express my this gratitude to the team of the SOS IGNU as a whole for giving this opportunity to become a part of the learning fraternity of the sustainability science. The help and guidance of Dr. Kuman has been source of inspiration, and it is thankfully acknowledged. And thanks are also due to my learning fraternity for providing me this opportunity to share my views and getting their vital inputs. I submit my apology for the disturbance in this regard, sir. So with this, I conclude my today's presentation, sir. गुड़िया गुड़िया एक मिनट बेटा, हाँ हाँ। अब इसको क्या करना है मुझे? एक मिनट, अभी मेरा खत्म हो गया।
खत्म हो गया?
हाँ
इसके हो गया ना, ये should be done, I think.
हाँ